pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for May 24th, 2018. It's Thursday, Duane, and let's start with some news that we've talked about like months ago. Nashville was announced months ago as a new franchise for Major League Soccer, and a few weeks later, we're like, yeah, we're expecting the second expansion side to be announced. Then there was a delay, but we knew it was going to be Cincinnati all along, didn't we?
Yeah, I've assumed it was going to be Cincinnati. Well, the Nashville stuff kind of developed quickly, if you remember back. I mean, they went from kind of way down our rankings to, oh, they're going to win as soon as they got that stadium announcement made, and it was a pretty quick one, and Nashville is an appealing market for them, but the Cincinnati one, it kind of became clear when Detroit wasn't really getting stuff together. I think Detroit was really their first choice, but when they couldn't get anything together there, they sort of went in to Cincy. But the delay must have been a little bit worrisome for your Cincinnati fans out there, but it never really seemed it was completely in doubt. I think they were just trying to, dot the T's and cross the I's, so to speak, right?
Yeah, and apparently it's going to be announced next Tuesday, and that's from a Cincinnati municipal source. And the other interesting aspect is they could be starting playing in 2019. Like, Miami and Cincinnati comes in next year, or just Cincinnati to make it even number of teams? 12-12?
Yeah.
And then 2 years after? Kind of makes sense.
Miami's got some more work to do, obviously, and it wouldn't hurt. I mean, it's been waiting forever at this point. I think that if you look at the Miami situation, they're better off to launch with everything in place than to launch half-cocked. I don't think that's a market that can really afford a hiccup off the start. So I don't think necessarily a year's delay in Miami is going to hurt them any more than the delay we already had. When the hell that team was coming like in 2015. 2013. Like
it was announced the year after Beckham announced his retirement. So when he played for PSG in that fall, that spring, it was announced like the fall after. So like 2013, yeah.
Yeah, no, I distinctly remember that was early days of Kane Soccer. I don't even know if I had a podcast. Well, I would have been between the podcasts at that point. But yeah, it's just, like I say, what's another year at this point? I mean, it's not like they're desperate for it down there. The league is more desperate for the market than the market is for the league, let's be blunt. Cincinnati is kind of the opposite one, and they're a team that's already there, so they can, snap their fingers and be ready to go. They can also look at that team and from just a player stock pool perspective, if they do decide to launch with two at once, it's not going to put that much of a pressure on the system because Cincinnati, they're building already towards an MLS team. That's what they have their eye on. That's what they are working towards now. And it's not that they're going to bring up 18 guys from their USL roster, but they probably will bring for 4 up, and that will take a little bit of the what was the last expansion draft? 5 players were selected last year, right? Yeah. You might even be able to get that down even fewer, right? And hopefully one day you'll have an expansion without an expansion draft.
Oh, maybe that's like the bonus. But if you look at the last few expansion drafts, at least LAFC, they're not doing too bad, second in the Western Conference. So some expansion drafts, I guess, work when you use them as assets and you trade them after. It's kind of an interesting way that LAFC did. But just to go back on Cincinnati now. Cincinnati, very, very high probability joining MLS, pretty much done. We don't know when, though. It's actually rumored 2019. And we know, Duane, Nashville, it's not that early. It's going to be 2020 at the least, sorry. Last time we heard about Nashville. So, now you have 12 teams in the Western Conference with LAFC this year. You got 11 in the East. Do you do some reshuffling, Cincinnati? Is it just put them in the East? But what happens with Columbus? That's the question.
Well,
does Columbus go to Austin, and then you actually have 13 teams in the West, and you need to Houston? Bye. You're going back in the Eastern Conference.
The Columbus situation, of course, is the elephant in the room. I mean, if they move to Austin, then they're probably going to go to the West, and you're going to want to. But do you want to move Houston out? Like, if you're putting a third team in Texas, do you want to get rid of that? You know what I mean? Like, you want to keep them together as much as possible, I would think. Kansas City might move back to the East. That would be another possibility. They are one of those central teams that kind of get screwed. And the other possibility that no one likes to talk about is the possibility of a central conference, dividing it up into smaller divisions. Even you might even see 4 divisions, like the NBA or the NHL, right? So that's another possibility. Was there 6 divisions in NFL? I don't pay close enough attention. But
NFL, I think so. 6 times 6, 32. Yeah, there's 6 divisions in the NFL.
Yes. So I could see a divisional setup or a conference. I think that they're pretty married to their East-West thing because they're a North American mindset. That way, and I'm not one to bash North American mindset when it comes to MLS. I think that it's valuable to have some level of nod to what sports culture you live in, but the conference thing is one that a lot of people would like to see them move away from, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. Don Garber likes to give those extra trophies out, likes to have your Eastern Conference champions, get your t-shirts sold, you get your hats sold. So if you like to have your Eastern Conference champion hats and t-shirts sold, I'm sure they're going to like to have their Northeast Division hats and t-shirts sold as well. So don't discount that possibility as well.
No, that's for sure. That's for sure. Where does it leave Sacramento? Where does it leave Detroit? Detroit, with the Dan Gilbert owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the little hiccup in the plan of Detroit now with the fact that they're okay, we're going to use Ford Field. Okay, we're part of the Detroit Lions now too as well. Everyone's getting involved to take care of this, and it delays everything. So, not even worried about Detroit. Detroit might have missed the boat, and it might be a few years before they're back. But Sacramento, is there a danger? We've been talking about this for years now. Cincinnati was nothing when Sacramento was having 13,000, 14,000 fans at USL games. Sacramento overtook them in the quote-unquote MLS franchise depth chart, and then some, with attendance of 24,000 average in the last 2 years. Where does it leave Sacramento? What else do they need to do to finally get the call, if ever?
I mean, you roll back our archives. I've been saying it for all 4 years of the show. Kevin, I think I've been saying that I'm concerned for Sacramento fans that they might be getting the Rochester treatment. And for those that don't get that reference, if you're new to listening to us, if you go back and look at the history of MLS in the 90s, Rochester, the Rhinos, or the Raging Rhinos as they were known then, was this small little niche team that was drawing a little bit better than the rest. They had plans to build this stadium, and there's a lot of people that felt that Rochester was the type of market that MLS should be going into. There was a lot of talk about them being, despite being not a sexy market by any means, but being a very soccer savvy market, that would be where they would end up going. And it just never happened. And now all these years later, we see just, the Rhinos not even operating this year, having to, host 4 TFC 2 games in their stadium just to keep their lease in place. So hopefully Sacramento doesn't have that exact situation play out, but I do have concerns about their MLS possibilities, unless, MLS really does continue to expand. And that's something that, we've talked about as well on this show before, is like, what really is their plan? They're always going to say they want scarcity to be a thing, right? So they're never going to admit that they have a long-term vision of going to 40 or 42 or 48 even. I think that they were always going to say, we're going to stop after this one, so that you're getting to desperation, and, cities are bidding against each other, and stadium plans get more pressure to put out there to get them done. But, unless they go beyond, if that truly is their thinking, then Sacramento might be in trouble, because if this is the last round of expansion, they have one more chance. And they probably will focus on the West. I do think Phoenix is the sleeper in the next round of expansion. That is a very desirable market in terms of size and TV possibilities and footprints. And, if you look at the geographical footprint of the league, I think that Phoenix would be very much where they'd like to go next. And if that's the case, then you're looking at one team, and it's whether or not Sacramento, they want them in or not at that point, and whether Sacramento still has that momentum, because you're looking at probably a 21-22 start at this point, and they've been battling it for years.
It would have been a decade at that point that Sacramento's having over 10,000 crowds for USL games. Just to go back to Cincinnati before we finish this segment, Duane, Caleb Porter left the Portland Timbers, and when he did, a lot of rumors were circling. Why is he leaving the Timbers? Well, why? Does he have a job lined up? Is there maybe a place close to home where they're expecting an MLS teams, and maybe sooner rather than later? 2019 comes really quickly, and if FC Cincinnati will join Major League Soccer for next year, things will need to happen fast, which means you need someone with experience and someone that's available right now. Is Alan Koch, manager of FC Cincinnati right now, the man for the job if the jump does happen to Major League Soccer? Or does a rumor of Caleb Porter going to Cincinnati comes back to the surface and maybe gets more play?
Well, we don't talk about scoreboard results of USL as much as maybe, when there's so much going on as we can. But if you look at Cincinnati's play on the pitch over the past couple of years, they've probably underachieved a little bit other than the USL or US Open Cup run. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that there's any guarantee that anyone is going to stay in place there. And Porter is the biggest name out there in terms of his MLS resume coming back. I have an interesting sort of thought on that is we've looked prior to the Orlando NYCFC expansion, the thought always was that it was better to come in as an existing franchise, right? You look at, the success of, you look at like the failure of a team like
Seattle, Vancouver, Montreal. Just those, like 2012, Montreal finished 6th, and they were like 3 points away from the playoffs. Seattle made the playoffs in the first season. Vancouver played decently in 2011. So, no, you had something, but now it seems to be different.
Yeah, Vancouver made the playoffs in the second season, I believe. So, certainly, there seemed to be that pattern, but then you look at the last couple expansions, and the Orlando NYCFC one seemed to be where the shift happened because that year Orlando was a bit better, but they both weren't great. And then from that point forward, the NYCFC sort of figured themselves out and have been the much better team. You look at the last 2 expansions, obviously with LAFC and Atlanta, and they're surpassing the teams that, Minnesota being the existing team that came in. So I'm curious to see what Cincinnati's going to look like in an MLS franchise and whether it's actually now with them loosening of the rules and giving more TAM to expansion teams and that it actually might be an advantage to come in with a clean sheet now. And that's going to be something very interesting to watch.
Well, you come in as well with no baggage, no history, no way of doing stuff that you might already have a feeling towards, right? If you already have a front office and a general manager and people working for you in the front offices, and you already have a way to do stuff, a way to manage your players, a way to manage whatever, you have a certain, you're accustomed to a certain way of doing stuff. When you start something new, you analyze the situation and you act according to what your analysis is telling you to do. So in a way, you're willing to assess and admit that you were wrong, but sometimes admitting that you were wrong in the past is tough. And if you've been there for a while and you transition to a higher level, you have to admit errors of the past, and that is very difficult. And sometimes you have promises that you made to players that signed with your club when you were in the USL, saying, look, sign for my club this year, I'm going to take you with me to MLS next year. Well, you remember that conversation we had? Yeah, I can't bring you anymore because you're not good enough. So those promises you don't have when you're a brand new expansion team.
Yeah, and you also have had the success of the last 2 that come in with the blank slate, as I said, that you can build upon. You can look at what they did and sort of emulate it. And I think LAFC in its own way did much of what Atlanta did, and I think any new team that comes in from scratch is going to do much of what those 2 clubs did. And again, you get, a lot of people will like to bash TFC and their failings, and there's no doubt that they had some really struggles in the early part of this decade, but that was the second chance, and they have no excuse for that. Their expansion, the first 3 years, they really had a lot of roadblocks that they don't get enough credit for, or they don't get enough attention to, that were put on them, the quotas and the money and everything else.
The quotas, right? The quotas were a big deal. You have to put Canadian players on the field, and we had
8 Canadian players in the field, and what people miss about that, not to belabor something that's this old of a debate, but one of the things that TFC really struggled with, and one of the reasons that, with all due respect, Whitecaps and Impact fans, that you took advantage of, is that TFC was the first in, and they figured out what worked and what didn't work for the Canadian teams in the league in terms of being competitive. They put TFC under a disadvantage, both in the fact that they had to carry so many Canadians, although there are 8 Canadians good enough to play. But the problem was that you had to pay them to a certain level because they became a scarcity, right? And that put TFC in serious salary problems right off the start. At any rate, we're getting way off topic, but the point is that none of those restrictions, those things have all been worked out. Expansion teams are set up now to be successful, literally in the first season. This Las Vegas Golden Knights thing, and they're going to be public enemy number 1 for the next 2 weeks, hopefully less. But that's what all leagues want now. They want that launch. And when Seattle comes into the NHL in 2 years, I think you're going to see that again. The only time that they maybe don't have that happen is if they ever move a team to Quebec because they don't really want to be there. But
they're going to be terrible. Okay, Florida, your team sucks now. Okay, you move to Quebec City.
Yeah, and you can just suck up there, and we'll make a little bit more money off you. No, that's the model though. Look how much money that, like, not to belabor, you wouldn't be get your bingo card out. It wouldn't be a Soccer Today without some kind of hockey reference at some point, but it is, and MLS is no different. And you look at the success of Atlanta this year; they sold 40,000 tickets for the All-Star game already. I don't know who the hell wants to go to the All-Star game other than for the party, but
well, apparently Atlanta does. Atlanta wants the party, so they're peachy, so that's good.
There you go. So that's a successful launch. And Seattle, they built in all those successful off-the-pitch launches, and they almost killed the Golden Goose when it came to TFC because they put them under such a disadvantage. And in many ways, as I said, they were the guinea pigs. So here we are many years later, and everyone's got it figured out because TFC finally got it figured out, and that was a lot of help from the league too. So away we go.
Are you saying we need to thank TFC for being terrible at the beginning of their history to making sure that MLS refigures how they do the rules? If that is the case, thank you, TFC.
TFC invented being terrible. There's no doubt about that.
I amen to that. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about Stephanie Labbe taking legal actions against the PDL.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today, May 26th, Halifax. The Wanderers will be announced. Gather around, people. Gather around. Come to the Commons next to the Citadel and watch your favorite team play footy. Patreon.com/Sports Podcasting Network for $2 a month. You get access to the exclusive Two Solitude Soccer podcast talking about Canadian soccer and the Canadian Premier League. Only Canadian soccer topics allowed on that show. Duane Rollins, myself, and Keaton Robbins. Brand new episode dropping today with Steven Sandor of the 11.ca, giving us a view and a different view on Cavalry FC's launch from last week. He was present in attendance from the launch, and we're going to talk about a bit of Halifax and their brand new team, which we talked about Derek Martin already of Sports Entertainment Atlantic a few weeks ago, which you can listen to on the Two Solitude Soccer podcast. Duane, just to finish on Halifax, I know you lived everywhere in the country. How important, I know it was more Fredericton and Moncton, but how important it is to finally have it official, a sports team, professional one, in the Maritimes.
Yeah, at a top level in any rate. There's been some minor pro teams out there, but I think it's just really important. Look, I'm an honorary Maritimer. I was there for 5 years. You have to kind of be born there to be a true Maritimer, but nonetheless, anyone
or married to one, so I'm okay.
Well, yeah. Well, you'd be surprised. Sometimes people that even have lived there for 40 years are sometimes considered it from outside. But that's just the nature of the region. But the region, it doesn't have a chip on its shoulder like other parts of the country sometimes do when it comes to like feeling isolated, but they definitely understand that they're forgotten about. Just even the flippant language for those out west that, the West wants in type stuff that always talk about those bastards out east. They're not talking about out east. They're talking about central Canada, right? And that language alone sort of says how much even the people that are complaining about being ignored are ignoring part of the country. And to have them represented, I think, was really important and is important for the region, but I think it's just important for the league to say, yeah, no, we're a national league. We want to go everywhere. Hopefully they can get into Newfoundland too, which is a different part. It's not Newfoundland isn't in the Maritimes, by the way, people. I'm going to give you a little geography lesson here.
Yeah, it's
the
Maritimes
are the three southern provinces. So New Brunswick, PEI, Nova Scotia, that's the Maritimes. Atlantic Canada includes Newfoundland. Don't ever make that mistake out there. Trust me, I learned the first year I was out there.
They'll beat you up. it's fighting words. But no, so it's an interesting aspect, and I strongly suggest you subscribe to us on patreon.com/sports podcasting network to get the exclusive content that we produce every single week. And speaking of exclusive content, a few weeks ago we had Stephanie Labbe on the show talking about her rebuttal to join the PDL. She made the team with the Calgary Foothills as a goalkeeper. She made the team as her player, never mind sex or anything else. And at the PDL told her no because she's a woman. And because you can't really change that, like it's not like I can go home and practice becoming a man and be a better goalkeeper because of it. No, you can't do that. But that's not constitutional. It's not necessarily legal. And we have one of those things that's called the Charter of Rights. And, well, she is taking legal actions, suing the PDL for wrongful lawmaking. And she has a case.
Gender discrimination, yeah. Look, and when we talked to her, and I encourage, if anyone hasn't listened to our interview with her, which was what, a week ago?
3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago.
Friday, yeah. Go back and listen to it in the archives. It's one of our better interviews we've done in a while, I think, in terms of timeliness and just her. She was very good in it.
She was very open and honest, and I really appreciated that she was just herself, and that's something. I really appreciated that interview.
Yeah, there was no spinning going on there, and anyone who thinks that she's doing it, like, I mean, there will be a subculture of people out there that will suggest that she's just looking for attention or something like that, but if you listen to that interview carefully, there's nothing to that. She legitimately feels that this is something that she needs to fight for, and not for herself, because she has an opportunity that she's point blank said that she's going to be able to tell us soon. She was DAZN. We give them a little shout out here. They covered
her costs, right? To go to France to assist to the Champions League final and watch her Canadian men's national team teammate Kadisha Buchanan win the Champions League with Lyon last week.
Yeah, exactly. So that was something that she got an opportunity to do for there, and I think that there will be more opportunities for her in Europe in the near future. This is a woman that is fairly confident in her abilities. She's an artist in her own right too. Her partner is an Olympian as well. So it's this is a successful family that doesn't need quote unquote attention. They just want opportunity to prove that they can compete at the highest level of the sport, and this is her way to do that for future generations. Because as I said, she will land with the women's team in Europe. Again,
Duane, let's be fair. She's going to be in the Champions League. She'll be in a very high-profile team. She mentioned it here when she was on the show. I do have an opportunity. It is lined up and is all taken care of, but I can't talk about it now because the season wasn't over. I wouldn't be shocked if he joins Lyon, Duane. It's like, come on, read between the lines. She's going to join Lyon or very similar franchise in England.
Yeah. Or any, the French Ligue 1 is really cranking up. Like Lyon and PSG are your top two teams there, but you might even, there's Germany opportunities too. Obviously Wolfsburg is in the final as well. In England, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, City, they're all cranking it up too. The women's game has really exploded in Europe, and there are plenty of opportunities for someone over there.
You know what's funny? You mentioned Wolfsburg. Their women's team is like one of the best in the world, and their men's team just got relegated.
Wolfsburg was one of the original great women's teams too, if you look at the history of that. And one day there's going to be a good documentary about the emergence of European club women's football, as we talked about the other day. I think it's really something to watch carefully in the next few years. But yeah, she's going to get an opportunity. So this lawsuit, again, it's not about her. It's not about attention. It's not about anything other than her fighting for what she believes is her rights. And the other part of this is really, I think, putting a microscope on that. Obviously, we're going to talk about the PDL, and we're going to talk about their failure to give her this opportunity that she earned. But the other thing that this should shed a light on is just how inflexible the NWSL rules are at this point in terms of allowing, particularly, there's a double standard almost in the NWSL in terms of not to beat up on Sid anymore. But
I was going to mention that exact example. It's weird where some people can be traded in a team they want just to be closer to their significant others, and some can even get a chance to play, right? You're right, there is a double standard. Is it because Labbe is Canadian and she's quiet and shy and low profile, and LaRue's loud and has a big social media account and American? I don't know. Yeah. Maybe there's something to it.
LaRue's Canadian too.
I know, anyway. That's the thing, but not according to her passport. And she chose where she is. Good for her. Anyway,
yeah. No, but there's a double standard in terms of the U.S. national team players, and that's not something that I'm really challenging. It's their league. It's the same as Canadians in Major League Soccer. We can fight and ask for it to be in their best interest, or make the argument that it's in their best interest to open up domestic spots to Canadians, but really we're asking them for a favor at that point, and it's kind of the same thing down there. A Canadian the Canadians have their allocation spots, but even their allocation spots don't guarantee them anything. A lot of those girls don't play. Women don't play as much as they'd like and as much as the Canadian Soccer Association likes, which is why they're quietly behind the scenes very much pushing for the Canadian Premier League to get going on the women's side as well, and why you're seeing, Buchanan and Lawrence and Labbe now, it appears, going Europe rather than staying in the NWSL, because they just have more power and more empowerment over their career over there and more opportunity.
And Duane, it's about the lifestyle too. How many times have you heard a young soccer player, and I'm going to use men in this example, and you understand why, who told us in an interview, like, I love playing here in MLS, but my dream is to go to Europe. When I was a kid, when I was, it's always about Europe. It was always about going there and making a star or seeing the world. And there's something about being able to become a globetrotter, a traveler, and explore the world because of the beautiful game. And if she has that opportunity to go to Europe, who wouldn't take it? And the level it's better than here. Let's stop beating about around the bush. It used to be lower. NWSL 3 years ago was higher. But then they started to have money problems, and the partnership with the Canadian Association and the Mexican Football Association fell through. Mexicans started their own women's side, and the Women's League is almost better than the NWSL already. And we're just left in the cold here with Canada, and we have situations like this. So, yeah, NWSL is not the place to play anymore if you're a high-level soccer player on the women's side. Europe is.
The Mexican League on the pitch, the NWSL is still better, but off the pitch is where the argument gets interesting in terms of their success in drawing big crowds and great atmospheres, and the high-end ceiling growth potential of that Mexican League is off the charts. They've got to, you've got to make an adjustment at some point if you're going to remain as the top league, destination league. But I guess the one argument the NWSL will have in many ways is it's kind of, I think, always going to be the league that gets the big American players and the Marthas out there, the Martas out there. They're players that have a big name because they want to have that pizzazz in their market. And it's going to be a decent league. Ultimately, what I think most of us that follow women's soccer would love to see, and what makes so much sense on the women's side, far more than it makes sense on the men's side, is to have a true Club World Cup for the top women's team, so we can stop having this debate in theory and have it on the pitch, because I would love to see Lyon play the Portland Thorns to see what that would look like. I think that's something that needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah, why not? Exactly. That's feasible too. Like 16 teams, gather 16 best teams in the world, no matter what the qualification process is. You make a nice round robin tournament, 4 groups of 4, top 2 moves out. You get yourself quarters, semis, and a final.
Well, the thing about the women's game too, not to do FIFA's work for them here, but the women's game has 2 clear off-cycle years and 2 clear on-cycle years. You simply play a Club World Cup at an advanced stage with maybe up to 16 teams, whatever it makes sense in terms to make sure the competitive balance is there, in the 2 years that you don't have an Olympic or the World Cup. That is what they would have as their end-of-season tournament. And then during the Olympic and World Cup seasons, they'd instead focus on the international game. And it would almost be a nice flow between, okay, these are the 2 years that we look at the clubs, and these are the 2 years that we look at international. And I think that would be kind of a next mix. They have the opportunity, because they're starting from scratch, to do it right. Whereas the men, they were trying to pigeonhole something into a system that was already overbooked, and so many pressures and so many pulls and pushes going on in different ways, right? So it makes so much sense. I've been advocating for this one for a while, though.
And we'll see, because there will be a reform of the FIFA Club World Cup on the men's side in the next few years. It's already in discussion, and it's one of the plans that Gianni Infantino wants to implement, is to give more credibility to that tournament. And maybe it does go by the way of having this tournament more important on the women's side, and you parlay that importance, eventually find the same type of format for the men's side. It's just an interesting thought experiment. But yeah, you can use some tournaments to raise the perception of another tournament or another competition. In this case, the Club World Cup for the women could become what this tournament is meant to be, and then you're trying to find a way to parlay that for the men. But yeah, exactly. That's where this tournament becomes important, is to say which team is the best in the league, in the world of the world of women's soccer, and that could be actually very fun to watch. And more and more it goes every single day, Duane. Some perceptions are falling. Some people are not looking at men's sports and women's sports, but are looking at sports. Men play sports, women play sports. Slowly but surely, that mentality is changing. Maybe before the day that I'm 6 feet under. It's not about men.
Well, you look at the Olympic movement, and it's the Olympics to move at the pace of glaciers sometimes in terms of progressive stuff. But you are seeing even that, one of the most conservative organizations in the world, moving towards more and more mixed gender sports. And, not every sport was going to work in a mixed gender situation, but every sport needs to have equal opportunity. And that's just something that's clear here in 2018.
I'm still not convinced that soccer cannot be a co-ed sport. There's no tackle. There's nobody punching each other in the face. I'm not convinced that example, you take Christine St. Clair's talent, you give her a foot less of height so she has a lower center of gravity and give her maybe a bit more speed. She's better than a lot of men. And sometimes there's something about being more balanced and having better skills with the ball, and you get around the guy who's too slow. I'm not convinced yet that co-ed sports cannot be existent. I used to think men and women had to be different, but some people playing sports show me that, if you really want to, you can. And show me that, I'm open-minded now at that point. And Stephanie Labbe is one of the reasons for.
Yeah, well, look, the world changes. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but you could look ahead 50, 60, 70 years, and you might see a third classification of team sports mixed. That's something that could happen down the road, but I think we're long into the future with that. It's fun stuff to think about.
All right, we'll be back tomorrow with World Cup Today, of course, to talk about some of our predictions, more of what to expect 20 days out of the World Cup. Tomorrow, it's 20 days before Russia 2018. Can you believe it, Duane? 20 days before we go daily right here, live on World Cup Today.
Yeah, we might touch on the Champions League final a bit tomorrow, too. We haven't really touched on it this week because we've got busy with other stuff. But, the Champions League final kind of works within that format, too. It's a world event.
It's one of the world's most biggest watch event outside of the World Cup, so yeah.
Exactly. All right, until that time, Kevin, as always, I'll let you say goodbye.
As always, you can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. We'll be back tomorrow with World Cup Today and some Champions League talk. And until then, as always, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.